Joseph Capehart is a teacher, a writer, a world builder based in Brooklyn, where they are nurturing an abolitionist bookstore and community well with their neighbors, pushing the needle when they can and flipping the table when they must. Let me just pushing the needle when they can and flipping the table when they must. Joseph is Black, queer, and concerned with freedom. Thank you so much for joining us, for being here, and I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for the gas, because that is fantastic. That is going to fuel me. And as was mentioned, my name is Joseph. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. And I have the immense pleasure of also introducing my friend, my comrade, and community member at the Garden, Laurie Germain, who is a Haitian-made, African-grown, non-binary migrant. As a storyteller, they use their experiences between cultures to push the boundaries of identity and its politics. Based in Brooklyn, Laurie can be found in conversation with other gender variant children of immigrants at the edges and intersections of the worlds they exist in. A writer and artist, Laurie holds their centers in liminal spaces.
Thank you, Joseph. As Joseph said, I'm Laurie. Hey, y'all. And I'll be here talking with Joseph about the garden and also talking about some of the work that it's encouraged me to engage in my own. So yeah.
Yes, and we're super excited to hop into this discussion with you all. And we're going to have a little bit of an exercise we're going to do on the front end to kind of frame the time that we're going to be spending as we share what the garden has been doing, how it came to be, so on and so forth. But I really wanted to, and I will at multiple points bring it back to this question of how is abolition pointing us towards the life-affirming? How can we use that to help us create the life-affirming? And really something that's been sitting on my heart is that abolitionists are uniquely positioned to bring in new worlds, to create life-affirming institutions, because we're not afraid of endings. And that is the big thing there, right? Is that as we're creating these life-affirming institutions, as we're trying to create worlds that work for us, we're going to constantly butt heads with the world that is, with the ways that it's failing us, the ways that it has not been built for us. So we have to be okay with those things ending in order to see the worlds that we need. And that's going to come up a few times, but I want us to sit with that as well, right? Is that endings can be scary, they can be anxiety inducing, can be terrifying, but it is something that we do not have to do alone. It's something that we should not have to do alone. And this, being able to speak with you all across space and time, because time zones are wild. I still don't get it. I really still don't understand. But speaking across time and space and saying something that we're experiencing over here could possibly be useful, be meaningful to you wherever you are sitting. The fact that as we each build our own maps towards our collective liberations, that we can share those maps and be like, all right, this is where I turn this way, this is where I turn in this direction. That those things can be useful, can be functional in this work that we're all engaging in. All right, so to start, I'm gonna read you all a quote from an article that I wrote myself that I thought would be, as I was taking another look at it, I realized that part of it would be really, really important to frame our discussion for today. If you see me looking off to the right, I'm in this 2-screen zone right here. So I am still here with you all. So hopefully, can you all see the words up on the screen? We're good there, fantastic. So the historical, political, and geographic landscape of our communities are unique. So why wouldn't our responses to harm be tailored to that difference? Abolition becomes too overwhelming a proposition if we are tasked with creating a single package alternative to police and prisons. This is where our reliance on the criminal punishment system as a one-stop shop for addressing harm has failed us. When we trust our society's safety to a single institution, its absence, no matter its failures, is difficult to conceptualize. Abolition offers us freedom from these myths of a single. I have a cat that is apparently exploring every single thing in this house. We'll pick that up later. Abolition offers us freedom from these myths of a single answer by empowering all communities to meet their unique needs, using guiding principles informed by our most vulnerable. And this was a really, really important place to begin, because knowing that we were coming to speak to folks who are coming from all over in their unique situations, unique circumstances, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, we did not want anyone to take our work or the maps that we've created for ourselves and say, oh, that is prescriptive. This is the way that I'm supposed to do it in this space. This is how it's supposed to work over here. But in fact, this can just be an opportunity of sharing, a really beautiful way to invest in each other's freedom, of saying that the work that we are doing here can be informative, right? But you don't have to, it's not necessarily a blueprint for how you should do it. In fact, that's work that you are going to have to do on your own with your community, because I know that many of us here, if you're engaged in abolitionist conversations, somebody at some point has asked you, well, what are we going to do? You know, and in that questioning puts all of the onus, all of the weight and the pressure on you, a single person. And I think that that's actually, it's symptomatic of the fact that we're used to having one person give us the answer, or one institution give us the answers for our problems. So it's hard to truly trust in ourselves and believe in our own inherent brilliance, and answer that question back of when people are like, well, okay, if we abolish police and prisons, like, what are we going to do about X, Y, and Z? What is your answer to X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, well, all right, let's come up with those answers together. That is the work. The work is that we should show up here and we should come up with the answers together, that you are just as brilliant as I am, that we both have a part to play in this, that our collective liberation is collective, it's bound up together. So to start off, I want everyone to take a moment and think about your community, your neighborhood, your city, your township, wherever you're doing your abolitionist work or hope to do your abolitionist work. And I want us to call them into the space using the chat. So go ahead in the chat and just type the name of these communities. If it's the specific names of people, the names of your neighborhood communities, go ahead. We'll take a few minutes to just call those into the space. Mine as well. Bedside, Lenape King, Belfast, Bearwood, Birmingham, Geneva, Northwest London. It's just beautiful. I'm seeing a lot of large spaces, Bearwood again. Now let's try and focus this in a little closer. When you turn to your left and your right, what does that community look like? Brum's grassroots queer community. All right, we're getting more focused here. My neighbor who always takes my bins out and brings my kids Easter eggs, yes. Older people without family, trans queer children of immigrants. Wonderful. So as we call all of these into this space, and feel free to reference these as well, I want you to carry these people, these communities along with you throughout this discussion. People who are recovering, young people who grew up in similar conditions to me. Yes. Yes, Gwendolyn Brooks, to the end. But she truly, the quote of "we are each other's harvest," We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond is huge. When you're doing this work, carry your people along with you. Bring your people along with you. Families fragmented and traumatized from separation through immigration, yes. Thinking ancestors, the ones that I carry with me, the ancestors that would not be too fond of me. Right. And as we carry these places now, I'm gonna give us 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and I want you to, this is something that you don't necessarily have to put into the chat. You can do this personally if you would like, and we can have a little time of sharing out. But what specific needs have to be met in these communities? Some of you already started to touch on that as you were naming them, right? Because as we name our communities, all of the needs and the resources and things start to come up with it, the history that comes along with it. So take a moment. I'll set a timer for just 5 minutes for folks to reflect. What specific needs have to be met in these communities? And if you struggle to think about the needs, consider, how are you positioned? Are you there? Are you with your community to know their needs? Are you among the people? Take this time, unmute so you can stop hearing the street. We'll take just 4 minutes. 4 minutes remaining. There's 3 minutes left. As you're thinking, push yourself also to include yourself. You are part of these communities as well. What are the things that you need? What needs have come up for you in engaging with them? What needs do you have to safely engage in this work together? It's a little under 3 minutes remaining. Now, we're going to, now that you have perhaps a list or the beginnings of a list or some collection of the needs that your community has, that you've witnessed in your community. Now, I want you to think about the specific resources your community already has. to meet those needs outside of the state? What specific resources does your community already have to meet these needs outside of the state? For example, there is definitely need for secure housing, stable housing in my communities, in my neighbors. A lot of people are struggling to find a home as rent gets more expensive, as living situations get less livable. And some of the resources that we have is we have some people in our communities with large houses. We have people with extra rooms. We have folks who have people leaving for the time. There's a couple of hotels in my neighborhood, like next to each other, like 3 of them. Right? There's a network. There's a network of people who get people rides, whatever it might be, in our community. Those are the specific resources I can think of to meet those needs that have nothing to do with the state, have nothing to do with police or prisons. Give just 2 minutes for this part. Just about 20 seconds remaining. I want you to keep this this work, whether you wrote this on a page, whether you typed it up on your computer, and really call yourself to make the connections between them. Right? We have our communities, the places that we're wishing to do the work. We have an understanding of their needs, the needs that our community has. And then we have a list of some of the resources that we have. Maybe there are resources that you just thought of that you were able to engage with in this time. But the main thing to take away from this is that it is impossible. It is impossible to create worlds outside of the state without specifically figuring out what the needs and resources of your community is, right? One of the goals of white supremacy and imperialism, colonialism, has always been isolation, is disconnecting us from our communities. So we must do the opposite. we must lean deep into connection, deep into care, if we're going to create a world, as was said before, that isn't just recreating the same issues and the same problems again. Because I know for myself, I started off really hopeful about what I could do for my community, about all these different options, these things that I could offer, so on and so forth. But I wasn't in it. I wasn't outside. I wasn't with the people. And I found that everything that I created felt flat. Everything that I had felt a little bit empty. It was missing the heart of these communities, the community that I claimed to want to serve. And it was only after truly allowing myself to become one of the people, to step forward in vulnerability, step forward in care and open arms, ready to learn, ready to share what I had, being open in that way, that's when the work could actually begin. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward into this. So I really, really hope that helps ground us here for a bit. When we're online, when we're on Zoom doing virtual things, it's really easy to be a bit unmoored because everybody's out all over the place, but I really want you grounded in the place that you're at. And now, as you listen to myself, as you listen to Laurie share, take what makes sense, leave what doesn't. All we ask is that you arrive, right? That you show up in the space and you be open to see just how things have been working for us, the story and the narrative behind what has been working for us, and how the specific needs of our community and the specific resources of our communities have served us, have served to create the garden is great. To create this beautiful, beautiful community of people that's constantly growing and constantly stretching itself to become something necessary, to become what's needed. All right, so to get started, I'll pop this back real quick. I'm just gonna introduce y'all just how the garden got started and where it has led us. I made the intentional decision to become a student of abolition in 2019. Throughout my life, I've had a lot of run-ins, really life-changing run-ins with the carceral system, with police and prisons in ways that has affected my life really negatively, but I didn't necessarily have the language to understand that, oh, those systems were working the way that they were meant to. I thought that it was just like, oh, there's something wrong, like something is broken about this world, that my family's being affected in this way. And it took me a while to realize that it was actually by design that they were working in that way. And I began reading works by Angela Davis and Mariam Kaba. That was my foot into that world. And that led me to work of different organizations like Critical Resistance and Transform Harm, which led me to the Black Power movement of the 60s and the 70s. That led me to the work of Kwame Ture and then Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara, among other Pan-African revolutionaries. And it's just like I went on this journey, this back and forth of learning and reading and pouring myself into these books. And for myself as a teacher, it's always been helpful for me to share what I'm learning with others to help it sink a little bit deeper for myself. So I began to share that, what I was reading and what I was learning online. And people had questions. People had a lot of questions. And I started to answer some of those questions using the things that I was reading. And then more and more people began to arrive with questions and ideas and trying to share what was going on, to the point of having over 200,000 people on social media engaging in this collective work of learning, of being students of abolition. And in that space, that online space, it became clear to me pretty soon how limiting that was. That in a lot of ways, a lot of people were showing up, taking the knowledge and then just sitting with it or using it to argue with people left and right, but nobody's material conditions were shifting. Nothing was changing, actually. We were just all smarter. You know, like we all had more information, and that wasn't very useful to the people in my neighborhood who needed to eat, you know. So in thinking about shifting that, the garden was born. was born honestly from frustration. And a lot of worlds are born out of frustration with the worlds that we have, of seeing how they specifically are failing us. It's just like, all right, we need something new. We need something new in this space. And the garden was born from that desire to reconnect theory back to living and breathing community, back to actually shifting the material conditions of our people. And with that, began introducing my neighbors to the tools that had been meaningful to me, in hopes that it would be meaningful to them as well. And that's where the garden began to exist as a bookstore, specifically, because the tools we chose to focus on were the books. We began selling books and connecting our neighbors to political education needed to encourage and support organizing work. As Malcolm X said, you can't organize a sleeping people. So this was our way of waking people up. You know, a lot of people in our neighborhood knew that they were experiencing something bad, much like myself growing up. I knew what I was experiencing was wrong, but I lacked the language to connect those experiences to the exploitative project of the state, to truly understand that this was by design and that we needed a completely new system, and this was something that we could even work towards. So we invited people into that space. But as I'm sure a lot of us here know, not everybody likes to read. So as a 7th grade reading teacher, I have specifically been in space with people who hate to read, who find it. So in engaging with that, there's also a question. It's just like, all right, we know we need this, but if everybody can't read, one, we can work on literacy. That's something that we can push and help people along. But we also need other ways to engage with our communities and engage with people. Because while I couldn't sit down and read this entire academic text with some folks, I could engage them in conversation. So we started using the instead of police we need, and I believe I have a picture here. This is the beginning of the bookstore. Yes, cute. And we had this instead of police we need board that began first, was brought to a protest. And it was brought to a protest again for me out of frustration, because I was like, we're walking around, we're doing all of this and nothing is changing. There's tons of people around me who seem to not really understand why they're out here in the first place. And it was disorganized in a lot of ways. So I was just like, all right, where my specific tools, I was like, all right, let's bring conversation to the people. So we brought this board out to a protest. We brought it to some pop-ups, to a block party around different places in Bed-Stuy. And we allowed the community to engage, to write down on Post-it notes, instead of police, we need X. And then they could share. And as you can imagine, that inspired a lot of conversation, maybe a few arguments as well, because as people approach and they're like, what do you mean instead of police? Don't we need police to do this? And I think in that space, I really learned that if my goal was to make abolitionists of every single person in the space, which is a great one, but if I needed to do that before I got any work done, then no work would get done at all. Right? There are going to be people who are intensely invested in the way that things are, whether they know it or not. So this allowed an opportunity to invite people into questioning and imagining and expanding their imaginations. So it's like, okay, if you do believe that police and prisons are necessary for your space to be safe, I want you then to take a moment, let's suspend that reality, and I want you to ask yourself, what ways do you keep your community safe without the police and prisons? What's where you are currently, like we talked about before, what resources does your community already have to serve you that has nothing to do with the state? And as they answer that question, they realize, oh, there's actually a lot that we're already doing that has nothing to do with police and prisons. Now it's like, all right, if police and prisons were not here, what would you want to see? And slowly you get a lot of tough conversations with people, but you start to see the cogs begin to turn for them, where they're like, all right, I can maybe imagine it. Maybe there was more space, there was more like revolutionary landscape than I realized within my mind. And I think a lot of people got to reconnect with their own brilliance of just like, you have these ideas that are here. So that was one of the ways. And we found other ways of just like easy projects to connect the community with these abolitionist ideas without necessarily having to make them take a course or something like that. And people responded really well to it. Other ways that we engaged as political education was being a voice during time of current events and being a living reminder of the fact that a lot of the things that were happening every other day, the world's ending in a new way. Like truly, every other day, it seems like things are falling apart in a new way, that all these things may feel new, but they are rooted in an exploitative project. They are rooted in something that if we look at it face to face, if we truly confront it, we can imagine worlds beyond it. But it requires being able to connect those things. One of the things, I suppose, an example would be, we had an event called Liberation Bound, in which we focused specifically on Haitian migrants that were coming into America and were at the border and were met with violence as they were fleeing violence. Right by the street, we're here. The community is live. It is summer. As they're coming over, fleeing both natural and man-made disaster, coming into this space, it was really easy for our government to sort of paint a narrative of just like, wow, there's this unprecedented surge of criminal migration, and what are we going to do other than be violent to them? What can we do other than to like strip away their dignity, to put them in cages, to do X, Y, and Z? So having the space to call the community in, call bedside, and it's like, all right, here's what's happening, here's the history behind what is happening right now, because this is so larger than just this moment. And not only here's the history, but here's how the tactics that they're using against our siblings at the border are similar to the tactics that they're using on us here in our own space. Because we can understand our own oppression, the things that we're going through, we then can extend that. And this is something that Angela Davis definitely helped just burn in my heart, is that idea that freedom is a collective struggle, and it's a constant struggle in which we continuously need to draw lines and connections between them. Because when we are able to draw those connections, then we can deal with it on a larger scale. I find that that white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism, a lot of it is able to thrive by really closing in our focus, right? It has blinders on in regards to history, to the rest of history. Because if we're confined into this small space, if we're super concerned with only what is right in front of us, then it's difficult to see how this web of the prison industrial complex affects us, not only just here, but across the world. The fact that this is a global struggle for freedom. It's a global struggle for liberation. And so our political education means we needed to expand that in that way. And we found I feel like a really simple way to do this, using Instead of Police We Need, using these projects, calling people into space and just saying, we see what's happening, here's how it's connected in this way. How do you see the connection? What's happening in your life that seems similar to what's happening over here? What have you learned in school? What have you learned online? What have you learned in community with other people that we can share with one another about how we might be able to support each other? The work that does of simply showing up together and saying like, all right, we refuse to not see. we refuse to not see. We're going to look squarely at what is happening. And we're going to look at it together. We're going to look at it with grace for one another. We're going to look at it with care for one another, but we're also going to challenge ourselves. We're going to push ourselves to see perhaps what we could not see before. But in that place, right, of working with people, political education, getting people connected to books and readings that were important, we were quickly confronted with another truth. That we could not organize sleeping people, yes, but you also couldn't organize starving people. We needed to find a way to feed the people. And over the past couple of years, we've had numerous wonderful opportunities to work with our community to provide emergency funds, to connect people to meals and housing, to consistently challenge ourselves towards the principles of mutual aid. Because after all, simply raising money to help others is simple. You know, that's easy. That sort of charity is widespread and has its place. But truly working with our neighbors to feed each other, protecting each other's dignity, and saying, like, I'm not here to save you. We are saving each other. we are doing this work together, has been so meaningful. And it's something that we continue to strive towards. But of course, in a world that's built upon exploitation and oppression, feeding people physically is not enough. You know, to get them to believe in their revolutionary potential is not enough. We also needed to feed them spiritually and emotionally. We needed to create opportunities to reconnect with each other and reconnect with our own inherent brilliance. Because, and this is a quote from Farmer Eva on Twitter. I don't know their real name, but Farmer Eva is the Twitter handle, and that's what it will be. But if you, I believe she said, if you organize in a way that kills you, you will create a world that kills you. So it was really important for us to think about, as we are doing this work, how are we sustaining people physically, but also spiritually as well? How are we showing people that as we do this work, that there is an abundance of resources for us to engage in, resources from each other, from the land, from the space that we're in, that doing this work doesn't mean that you have to die. Right? There's this idea that you need to martyr yourself for the movement, that you tire yourself out and exhaust yourself, giving and giving and pouring out to the point where you have absolutely nothing left to actually enjoy the world that you've created. So trying to do this work, and this was a huge thing for me. I tend to get in spaces in which I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it myself. If nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to get it done, right? We're going to make it happen. And I found that when I did work like that, I created spaces, I created organizations in which I was doing all the work, in which I was giving all and all and all. And then I found that I didn't have anything left. And a lot of those things fell flat, right? But when I started doing work more collaboratively, when it was, okay, we are creating this space, I cannot do it alone. I refuse to do it alone. Then we created worlds, we created spaces in which people were never alone. Were never stuck in places where they felt like they had to show up perfectly, where they felt like they had to have all the right answers, that they had to do all the work on their own, that in fact, it was inherently collaborative, and that is work that we could do together. We're able to create worlds that were not killing us, but were feeding us.
So I'm Haitian. And so when it comes to food, I'm often food and feeding people. I'm often reminded of the saying that my parents shared with me that goes, si genyen pou yon, genyen pou deux. Which is to say, if there's enough for one, there's enough for two. And so, you know, in this context, I'm asking myself, if one person can imagine a new world on their own, staring at the bus, out the bus window, think of the new worlds that we can imagine if we meet each other in these dream spaces. And so the community well is the garden's iteration of the dream space. It's part mutual, part material mutual aid, as Joseph was sharing, and part emotional and spiritual mutual aid. It's a space where we meet with the food that we have to offer and where we can share and exchange and always leave full. Favorites of the community offerings from the well have included Black Love Reading Circle and Sunset Service. And to talk about them a bit, Black Love Reading Circle is a space held to talk about love as we have experienced it in service of abolition, and how it acts specifically to tap into the ways that us as Black people create and recreate love for our survival and for our sustenance and for our liberation. Sunset Service is my personal favorite, and it's a Black queer writing circle. However, it's different from other writing circles in that writing is never seen as the end goal, but rather it's a tool, one of the tools that we use to work through ideas and thoughts and feelings that bring us closer to our personal liberations, but also our collective ones. I always leave with an answer to something that leads me to more questions, but more precise questions for myself. I will say about that space, though, that so much of the affirmation of it is arriving in it, in giving it our presence and letting it hold us and each other in the exchange that ensues in community. And that is really the heart of the community well. It's a reminder that we don't have to do the hard parts of this work alone, decoding texts, unraveling words, sharing spirit. They don't have to be hard. And also in partaking in spaces like that, I'm personally reminded that capitalism breeds isolation for a reason. We're not meant to be doing any of it alone. Personally, I'm also of the belief that we all come to this earth with a purpose, and that for most, if not all Black people, that purpose is oriented in some way towards liberation, because there's so many calls to it and we exist in so many ways. And so the garden holds space for us to meet in whatever forms our personal work looks like and discover our own paths towards liberation, while also making sense of the ways that our liberation is connected to each other's. In my experience of it, the community well has offered me a way to stop daydreaming alone on the bus and to begin to imagine the world that I dream of out loud with others, to walk off the edges of these burning worlds and meet in the spaces between them. My between space, personally, asks me what my liberation means as a Black, trans, genderless child of immigrants and a migrant in my own right. And I share this thinking about the question that Joseph posed at the beginning of this chat. What are the needs of my community? We all answered this a little bit. I'm excited to kind of hear some of y'all's later, but my answer to this question started arriving when I challenged myself to be more precise about who I hold myself accountable to as a community. And as a migrant, I've found that my community often comes to me first through shared experience, because the land beneath me has been constantly shifting. And so in naming my experience as a Black, gender variant, second-gen immigrant, and knowing that I am most definitely not the only one, the answer of our needs came to me, first slowly, and then really, really quickly, in that it's been a space to be affirmed, a space to be seen, to be safe, and to belong. And so the space that I'm creating in response to this is called Second Genders. And its goal is to build a living archive and community by and for trans and gender diverse second generation immigrants. For some explanation, in many Black communities and other immigrant communities of color in the imperial core, so like, the UK, the US, France, etc. Queerness and transness are often seen as experiences that only exist within the country of immigration. At the same time, sexual and gender variants are also placed outside the often Christian, not always, but often Christian notions of good character that the first generation immigrants in a family, usually the parents, my parents, for example, often aspire to. And so this double kind of polarization simultaneously distances the second generation immigrant from their home culture, while placing them outside of the bounds of good citizen in the country of immigration. So second genders is a landing ground for those who have been pushed to the edges of those boundaries and made to exist in the spaces between them. The role of second genders is to spark conversations that explore our experiences of identity and identity formation and belonging in relation to our contemporary experiences of our familial and ancestral cultures. And so when I think of the tools that we have outside of the state to do this work, the first ones that I've reached for personally in this space was my voice, my writing, my expression, and my empathy. And so as a multimedia platform, Second Genders centers expression and creative expression as a tool for naming the worlds we walk between as Black gender variant children of immigrants out loud and together. This reclamation, it allows us to bend the ways in which we've been told to see ourselves in order to transform the ways that we are seen in our various cultural communities. And my hope is that in telling the stories of our lives, we are rebuilding the narrative that to be trans is also to be Haitian, to be Liberian, to be Malawian, etc. And from there, we can begin to dream the worlds that need to be imagined in order to do the intentional work of building it. I'll end with a quote. My favorite author, Akwaeke Emezi, if you haven't checked them out, you should, has shared, in order for us to make a new world, we have to be able to imagine it. From there, you can actually start building it. So when I think of what abolition is teaching me about the creation of a life-affirming world, I think first about what we need to imagine it and what it takes to do so in a house on fire. The journey that spaces like the Garden and Second Genders accompany me on in this work. And so far, they are helping me answer the questions of culturally, like what is keeping my community from imagining care? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And again, thinking about how we create the life affirming is that when we create worlds that are truly life affirming, new worlds will be created from it, right? So in trying to create the space of the garden, that created space within people, people like Laurie, who then created the space of second genders, which then second genders create space in other people that then have now space to create some more. So it constantly creates on itself, where when we have these institutions that are incredibly death affirming or focused on limiting people, you'll see that our imaginations gets closed off. There is no other world other than the one that we have, right? It leads us in this place of feeling hopeless. It leaves us in a place of being like, there is too much for us to deal with, because just over and over, just grief upon grief upon grief, it's too much for people to hold, right? But if you are confronted with all of this grief and you have a place to take it of just like, all right, I have a community in which I can create new worlds with. This grief can live outside of my body for a moment. Then I think we have a way forward. We have a way forward that's a lot more sustainable. And by a lot more sustainable, I just mean sustainable at all, because the shit we got going on right now is not sustainable in the slightest. And we're constantly running up against that. The human in us is constantly reminding us, this does not work. What will you create? What is keeping us from imagining the worlds that we need to create? So thank you so much, Laurie, for setting that. It's so exciting hearing people speak about the space and being in a place where I get to speak about it as well, because you truly see how rich it is for everyone in their own ways, because myself and Laurie are both having unique experiences, have had unique experiences, but we're using this space to really, really lean into that, asking the precise questions, for ourselves. And that's it, that's us. That is the garden.
Drop mic moment. I'm like, we're all trying to get out to Bed-Stuy. There's so much in what you've shared, and I would invite anyone to please, send your questions, your thoughts, your affirmations, your love, your gratitude through. And there's something that I wanted to come back to, and I think, Laurie, you kind of really beautifully articulated this idea of material mutual aid as much as spiritual mutual aid, which I was like, oh. I think I've been thinking about this a lot, and I love the way that you referred back to love, and that was an integral part of like the Black Love Reading Circle. It's an integral part of the work that you're doing and cultivating. I always feel, or I'm sensing, that the sort of the standardized version of how we do things does not in any way align with this. When you talk about spiritual mutual aid, I was like, I don't even know if, like, do we know how important that really is, you know, to tend to the spirit in the magnitude of the ways that we talk about that, right? To do that, I just wonder if you could like give us a little more of a zoom in terms of like the reading circle, the writing circle, like as almost like a I can only imagine that what you talk about is only a snippet of the actual experience of what happens in these congregations. But I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more to those.
Maybe I can speak about Black Love Reading Circle, and then Laurie, if you want to talk about Sunset Service in that space. So in the Black Love Reading Circle, it's at first in talking about love, right? Our conception of love and the way that we've been moving in the community has been heavily influenced by bell hooks and the book All About Love, Salvation, Black People in Love. And the specific definition that bell hooks uses for love is one in which really raises the standard of what it truly means to be in loving community. I think in a lot of ways, when we think about love, we're like, all right, who are the people who are there for us, who care, provide for us in a specific way? But finding out that care and provision are only pieces to that puzzle, right? That there's a deeper extending of oneself, truly, because it will benefit your spiritual well-being. It is a giving of self. So in our Black Love Reading Circles, it's an opportunity to say, all right, this has been meaningful to me, and I'm bringing it here. And I think you'll hear also kind of similarities in just the ways that we've talked about the entire presentation of just like, where are you coming from? What are you bringing into this space? And how uniquely can that inform this work that we're trying to do together? Because with mutual aid, constantly mutual aid and charity get confused for one another. Charity being one in which I have the power and I'm going to come and leverage my power for your sake. Mutual aid saying that we are all coming in a space of power with a recognition of that power, and we are sharing information with one another. We are sharing goods with one another. And in Black Love Reading Circle, we get to do that of just like, I've experienced Black love in this way, you've experienced it in this way. So how can those things inform one another? How can that push us forward in the questions that we have, in the ways that we need to engage in society? Is there a way for us to truly get past this idea that community is just people who are like-minded or have one thing in common gathering in a space? That is not a community, that is a gathering. That is simply a gathering of people who are kind of similar, right? A true community is a space in which we are here to give, to share, to love on one another, to support each other through things. So our Black Love Reading Circles allows us to experience that in a microcosm and then really challenge ourselves to see how that can work in our communities. And the best part of it, I think, is, for me, is doing the Black Love Reading Circle. All of our stuff is really centered in bedside. So we'll do the work that's there. People will come and show up from around bedside, and then you'll see them throughout your day, throughout the week, at their jobs, with their kids, with their partners, at the park laying down. And then you get to be living reminders as you're moving through life of just like, how can we love each other now in this moment? All this love that we talked about it in this space and actualize, or we get to actualize it in this moment. We get to check in and be like, how are you doing? Do you need anything right now? Like, how are you? How is the day holding you? And we get to push past this space again of isolation in which we're just moving through life. And it's just like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember you, cool, bye. But no, it's just like, no, I'm actually invested in your freedom. Because you being free makes me free, and us both being free makes our community far more free. And that is that is it. That's how I would talk about it. It's one of my favorite things about that space that it creates.
And to chat about sunset service, I first want to, elaborate a bit on spiritual mutual aid, and share that I think that in moving towards liberation, we cannot, abolition and liberation, we cannot forget that spiritual part of it. And when I say spiritual, I mean spirit as not life, but that experience of living and that kind of experience of living in our bodies. And when I talk about that, I'm also thinking a little bit about Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic and that pull and that desire and that light that kind of draws us. And it's equally important to have that on this side as it is on the other side and in the new worlds that we're creating. And I personally think it's what's going to lead us to it. In terms of sunset service in particular, as we said, writing is not, we're using writing, but we're not necessarily like gathering to decode Fanon. That's not what's happening in sunset service. Each gathering is really different and it has a different theme. So for example, there is one set around haikus and negative self-talk and affirmations. There was one around cartography and mapping and what our personal maps look like. There was one recently, last night, about endings, and what the endings in our life are and how we are using them to move towards new beginnings. And I would say one of my favorite things about this space is the invitation that it comes with, not only to show up in this space, but to lead a space. I think one of the things that Joseph does beautifully in holding the space of the garden in sunset service is inviting others to be part of carrying the work out. And so if someone has an idea, oh, I have this, I enjoy making zines, or I've been thinking about this certain topic, I'd love to explore it in a space with other people. Sunset service is a container for that. And a container that changes shapes based on what the theme is really, really beautifully in order to hold us all. Yeah, that's what I would share about it.
It made me think, I love what you just said about endings as well as part of the of last night's sunset service. But what you started this conversation with, Joseph, about abolitionists being like really well equipped for change is because of we're not afraid of endings. I really, really found that such a thing to come back to. And it made me think of, I think, Laurie, it was you that left us with the question, what is it that keeps our communities from imagining care, that you're exploring with your work? And it was making me think about the difficulty of this, particularly when we're working in and with and as part of traumatized communities for lots of different reasons. I'm really interested in your thoughts about that, but I wonder if we can come first to is it Nosi? Pardon me if I haven't pronounced your name correctly, but you have some ways that your community are tending to, was it the spiritual mutual aid aspect? Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just got really excited when I was hearing about the different groups and community support, and like especially hearing bell hooks and the ways that y'all have put into practice the teachings, the very deep and wise teachings of that book. Something that I am very excited about and grateful for in my life is my writing group. So I have a writing group on Sundays, and it's a BIPOC writing group. And I think it really speaks to what Laurie was saying about the spirit of like what it is to experience embodiment and just be alive together. And it ties into that we are not, no one is free until we are all free. It's interesting how we all came together. A few people knew each other from different mental health groups and organizations. And then we wanted something that wasn't just like a support group, and not to say just like to minimize support groups, but it wasn't a support group. It involved something else, but it still had that element of community support, of holding space for what we have to go through, like through the day. But we wanted something that had release, that wasn't just talking. And so we were like, okay, a writing group. But I just wanted to share, it's been incredible seeing how this group has come together, because now it's like, it's just transcended. Like, we call it the writing group, but it's just Sunday group. Like, everything happens in this group. Sometimes we only get like half a prompt done because someone said something and it moved someone, and then we're sharing about this and that. Sometimes we write like 4 different prompts, and I think what's so special about the writing element, and I am a writer, so I've been looking for different groups for a while, but in this group, it's the way that it is just infused with love. Like, the whole group is done. I mean, we open with a land acknowledgement that is sincere, right? A lot of groups and gatherings that I've been to, especially in Black community, I've been surprised at times with how there hasn't been land acknowledgement, there hasn't been any mention of the treaties or the colonial project on this soil, and there's a bit of disconnect there. But this group, you know, we always bring that in terms of when we're talking about history and getting connected to history and context and what abolition means for us today in our bodies and in our communities. We can't ignore the indigenous peoples of this land and the continued genocide against them, as well as how our ancestors have been kind of co-stewarding this land as slaves amongst the indigenous people, and this very intricate and foggy history for a lot of us. I know I still have a lot to learn, but this group, you know, that started as a BIPOC writing group, has now also become a space for us to talk about our shared history, our shared impact, and what we can do to reach across these, again, imperial, like, designed boundaries to make us feel separate from the natives here, as if we're not involved with one another and our struggle for liberation is not the same. So that's something we've brought into the group. And the spiritual nourishing that has come from sharing our writing has, like, been, it's just been astonishing. Like, I'm not surprised because everyone's just beautiful and coming in love and being vulnerable. But it's also surprising that, yeah, sometimes we're able to really open up, you know, because writing kind of puts a bit of space between you and the experience you're talking about. So it's not as direct as a support group of like reliving it, but it's your way of putting it through poetry, through story, through something, and getting to share some of our, you know, most violent experiences with people who understand what it means to live through something like that. And then we're able to hold space for each other and uplift each other, and then also praise each other's work and talk about how, you know, I love how this is, you know, how elegant it was, or how luscious and colorful, or how you took something really heavy and you made it sound like, you know, and just we get to compliment each other, and we get to praise each other on our skills and our talents as writers. And that is like very nourishing for the soul, as people who are always being put down and we're always told like our voices are always silenced. Then it gives us a place to have our voices heard. So I just wanted to say that because it was just one of those things where we just gathered together, like we need something, similar to what Joseph was saying, like we just need something. And out of this something, so much more has blossomed. And we also have our own projects. We want to put together an anthology, and now all these things are flowing out of this space that was just like, yeah, BIPOC writing group. And really it's like become everything. It's become spiritual space. It's become like, you know, a space for us to hone our craft and become better writers. We've made friends. I went camping. I made friends with someone in the group camping a couple of weeks ago. Like, just so much connection that has come out of it. And I just want to say how writing is so hard, and it's just really good. It's a brilliant mechanism for getting out so much of the violence we have to take in as Black bodies, for getting it out through writing and getting it out of your head, out of your body, like systematic kind of healing as well.
Right. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it really shows that there are obviously writing groups all over. There are writing groups, there are book clubs, there's a myriad of them. right? But it's something specifically beautiful happens when you engage with, when you truly take space to see and hold one another in all that we are, right? And allow these worlds to be built, the things that it will surprise you, to be surprised constantly of what is happening, what is building, what is going on in that space. That's how you reconnect with revolutionary potential. Because I think these spaces, like I said, are widespread, but they're disconnected from that revolutionary potential. They don't see necessarily how these spaces can be spiritual and lean into even material mutual aid. They don't see how then that way of supporting one another can actually be a way of undermining the state, of creating a new world outside of these exploitative systems. Right? It's just like by reconnecting that, simply by saying like, you know what, let's do a land acknowledgement. Let's really think about where we are. Let's refuse to not see, right? Or let's refuse to not see, right? Let's look squarely at what we have here and let's approach it together. And in that space of expanding imagination with one another, you expand the possibilities. And in those possibilities, this imperialist project shakes. It quakes in fear at the expanding of our imagination and possibilities, because they know that it is that our unity, that us coming together to do this work is their greatest threat. Right? It's truly with the people. It's truly with the people. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it really, really shows how, regardless of where we are, if we're continuing to lean into those spaces and really see the revolutionary potential, the possibilities are endless. They are endless and endless and endless.
Absolutely. And it also reminds me just, even Nosy, what you said about, it's a writers group, but actually it's it's everything. I find that such a commonality with, Black visionaries in particular, who no matter the container, because of our experiences, because of all that we come with, our histories, our futures, our dreams, ambitions, whatever we create, it's always so much more than almost that language can fully encapsulate. So I'm like, yeah, the Garden, they speak about themselves as an abolitionist bookstore, and yeah, we've created a space called Yard, and yeah, there's this writing group, but actually that, like you say, that's almost like just enough of a framing that you can understand, but that's the introduction. The depth comes, like you say, with proximity, with presence. And that, I keep coming back to this idea of, I guess, abolition is not an easy, it's not an easy win. It's not something that we wake up tomorrow and say, great, we're going to do this now, that's it, cool, and we've got it all sorted. I just do this and we'll be in abolition land. Like, the life practice and all the things that you navigate and all of the complexity that comes with it, sometimes it feels really, really impossible. And I just wanted to kind of go there for a moment in terms of those challenges of what it comes to really lead with a vision. I love what you said, the idea that the Garden as a space, as a vision, as a practice, can also create spaciousness within the self that can also then lead to new things, new spaces, new works, new projects. The idea of, this being a regenerative process in that way deeply excites me. And I know the level of complexity that comes with that. And I also, I wanted to circle back to this idea of when we're working in, with, and as part of harmed communities, it is not easy to do for lots of different reasons, whether it's we project our pain onto our fellow, organizers or community members, whether it's we're afraid, we're exhausted, like we're unwell, and we're trying to build impossible things within impossible circumstances. I wonder if you can just speak to some of the challenges that come with both holding on to a vision in a world that we live in and also leading the work that you are. Like, what are some of the challenges that come up for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think, namely, the challenge, as you spoke, is that we are traumatized by the world that we live in, and the way that the world has been presented to us, the ways we've been forced to live and engage in this world. So, in thinking about abolition or presenting abolition as some sort of balm, right, or like a healing orientation of self, right, that requires, like, you have to address the wound. And in addressing wounds and addressing trauma and all of these things, there's going to be withdrawal, right, from things, because one of the things that Black people specifically know how to do is to adapt, to really terrible situations, is to find new ways of being, of surviving through that, right? But where's the space to learn to thrive, to truly live your life when you spend all that time surviving? So I feel like a big, one of the challenges is running up against that survival instinct. You know, people will come through with really, really firmly rooted in ideas that are actually firmly rooted in ideas that are harmful, but they don't see it as such. They see it as, this is just the way the world is and this is the way it has to work. So trying to get people to imagine beyond the harm that has been done to them and the harm that they have adapted around is huge, because we've learned to navigate the systems, you know, and in learning to navigate it, there is a sort of investing in it that it's hard to convince people to sacrifice in some ways. You know, if you are financially, spiritually, emotionally, materially, geographically invested in the way things are, and this group is showing up talking about ending the way things are and creating this new thing, that can be a really scary place. So I feel like the biggest challenge is running up against that fear and finding ways to move at the speed of care, because there are moments where I'm like, come on. Where I'm just like, you have to, like, I'm just like, you have to see how this is being orchestrated to make you believe this, to work on this, that you have fought and fought and fought, and you shouldn't have had to, right? That we can create something new in this space, but it's really challenged us to move at that speed of care. Just be like, all right, here's the space that you're in right now. Here are the ways that we can challenge you. And as was said in the bio, where can we push a needle? Where will the table need to be flipped? You know, because both are necessary. They're needed. But even I say that as a challenge, and then I'm just like, but when you're in community, when you're like with the people, when you are aware of their specific and unique needs, as well as your specific and unique resources, it starts to ease a little bit. Because I think recently I was speaking to somebody, and I was speaking to someone about the importance of free spaces in the community. And they were just really obsessed with, like, where's the bottom line? Where's the money coming from? How are we doing this thing? And I'm like trying to get this person to imagine beyond this capitalist project of us getting enough money to be okay, you know? And it was really difficult, but in considering the need that was there, it was stability, was safety. This person had went their life like many of us, just grew up in poverty, and they're just like, I never want to return to that place of unsafety. So what safety could there possibly be in this world that you're creating outside of these things that are here? But I was blessed enough to engage with this person's grandparent, to like also be in community with their family member. So I heard their story as well. And by having the resource of their story, being like, well, actually, this is what Mama B said happened throughout your family. Like, here is the ways that you all have navigated it. Here's the ways that it hasn't worked. Here's my story. Here's how my family, like my dad grew up like quite literally chasing rats to cook, right? It's just like, and then coming to America and being in a space where he believed that he needed to push and push and push so he would never, ever return to that space. It ate his body away, right? As he thought he was moving towards safety, he realized that he was actually killing himself in the process. So using the stories of both of our families and this being like, so I know that there is so much that's happening here, but how about you just come into this space and let's just eat? Like, let's chill. Let's have a moment in which you are taken care of and you are provided for, and then we can work that through. So so when I say it's a challenge, I'm also just constantly confronted with the ways that we approach those challenges, because as complex as the issues are, so complex and rich is our brilliance, is our connection, is our love and our family. And it's just like all of those issues, they don't stand a chance, honestly. And in my experience, they don't stand a chance in the face of people showing up and being present with one another enough to say, this is what I have and this is what I need. What do you have? What do you need? How do we share and work through those things together? And yeah, there's probably some other challenges too I could talk about as well. It's definitely difficult work, but the most difficult work is specifically getting people to believe in themselves, to believe in themselves, and then believe in each other, to trust themselves, and then to trust others. That work is so tough, and I'm just like, so much of that begins at the bottom of a pot of just like, who is feeding me? who is serving me? We had an opportunity to get a physical space for the garden a few times, and we decided to hold off and be like, all right, what is our community need specifically here? Because I want a physical space. I do. I truly would love to have this giant bookstore and Best Buy, whatever it might be. But it made more sense for us to instead every single week to walk up and down the neighborhood and to knock on people's doors and just be like, hey, how are you doing? Like, we're just checking in, making sure that everything's good. We have X, Y, and Z that's happening. You're welcome to engage or not. We just want to make sure that you're good. Or walking over to a store and just being like, hey, do y'all need any help? Like, we have a lot of beautiful Black-owned businesses in Bed-Stuy. And it's just like gentrification is fighting that, is pushing that through. So showing up at those businesses and just checking out and be like, how can we serve y'all today? Like, you need somebody to take up boxes, you need somebody to run numbers, whatever it might be. We have people that have time and they have energy, and we would love to share that with you. Not because we are saviors that have come to give you all that we have, but because you specifically have served us, and we can now serve you, and we can take part in this exchange, this beautiful exchange with one another. Yeah.
And like you say, that then becomes this ongoing regenerative process. We're feeding each other, we're tending to each other, and that is the work. Oh, child, I'm like, I have so many more questions, and there's so many more things that I would love to ask you. I'm conscious of time. We've got time for one more question. If anyone from the group wants to ask anything, now is your moment. Because I'm like, I have post-it notes galore of things, and I'm like, anyone has any other question?
And we can also give less long-winded answers because that was a journey.
No, this is needed. I guess I have just one thing to come back to for the time being. And one of those is, it's in thinking that the idea that the systems that we're fighting against, they're not only out there, they're like also in the room with us, they're present within us. And it's like an active process and practice to kind of grapple with that and contend with that. What do you think that you think that we need to be mindful of as students of abolition, as people who are interested in what abolition can teach us about the life affirming? What do you think that we should be mindful of in our continued study?
Laurie, is that something you would like to speak to? Otherwise, I
I'm thinking if there's some things coming, you start.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I think being mindful of the fact that in so many ways, like you said, these systems, these institutions are haunting us. It's so much of how we've learned to see the world and engage with the world has been influenced by them. And that is not our fault. That is not of our own doing. There are maybe ways in which it has employed us in its own doing, right? But that is not ours. That is not of us. It is something external that is trying to force its way to work along with you. So I would say, one, really be aware of the ways that your body rejects it. Because as your body rejects these systems, like if you are running through a job that's running you into dirt and you are tired and you're falling asleep, listen to your body. Because your body is telling you that this does not work for us, that this is not sustainable for us. Because and then from there, you can take action, you can take intentional action. Because throughout this work, the systems that have been imposed on us are not our fault, but our step forward is our work, is our responsibility. Our responsibility is to continue moving forward, doing so intentionally and doing so with others. Think for yourself, yes. Learn to think for yourself. Do not think by yourself. That is I found to be incredibly dangerous. When we think by ourselves, it's really, really easy for us to end up isolated in our thoughts, to not have them challenged, not have them move, to have them evolve, especially when we're sitting in a space that could be read as quote unquote like liberal or leftist. There can be this sort of this misalignment where we believe that we believe we're on the right side of history, and that sometimes creates blockers for us to truly see the ways that we need to work and the things that we need to continue to push within ourselves. Because the things that free us at one point can also shackle us in the next. So making sure that we're constantly being informed by our community, that it's truly rooted in the people. That's the place that we get to really challenge the ego in this work, challenge the ways that our savior complexes need to be destroyed and will need to be destroyed over and over again. Right. And there are so many things that will begin to come up as long as we stay rooted with each other. In that work. And then I would say, always go back. If you read something that was meaningful to your abolitionist journey 2 years ago, and it really started you off, return to it. Please return to it. You need to continuously find yourself to like reassess the foundation that you're building on top of. Right? The abolitionist world is built in a garden, right? It's built in a garden. It's on a landscape that is rich and that is fertile, right? But you need to continue to go back towards it. You can't keep building on top of the thing and not checking out the foundation, right? Go back, remain rooted, make sure that you are re-educating yourself. Because just as you continue to move and build and create these worlds, that is a threat. So therefore, there are going to be ways that the system is going to push back on you. And some of those ways happen internally, and they're very, very, what's the word? They're sneaky. There's maybe a better word, but it's very, very sneaky. And then suddenly you're just like, oh, there's a cop in my head that I need to abolish yet again. In the same way that the cops continue to be funded despite their failures, there's ways that we reaffirm this kind of carceral logic within ourselves when things get scary, when things get hard. So we need to continuously go back and just reaffirm, re-educate ourselves, keep ourselves there. Truly never fool yourself into believing that you've got it figured out and now you're set and that you're good. but rather continue to be in community with people that you can stay accountable to. You can stay accountable to and practice accountability day after day.
And I'll share quickly as you're talking about how these systems exist not only externally but internally, that they didn't always exist. For me, I'm thinking about second genderism, was thinking about specifically in our cultures. Like these systems didn't always exist in our cultures. And so, as Joseph was saying, in terms of remembering, it's also remembering what there was in the world before capitalism, before colonialism, and not necessarily returning to it, right? That world is gone, but how can we learn from it and move forward? How can we use that as a piece of building our foundations and move forward into building this new world?
Thank you so much. And that, that point also just reminds me of, and nothing is perfect. And the generations before us have not been perfect. They didn't get everything right, even before colonialism, even before carceral systems as we know them now. There were other forms. There was exile. For some of us, wouldn't be able to be in, all of these things. It's like, what do we learn and what do we move forward? What do we advance? What do we grow? What do we cultivate? What do we allow? All of these things deeply excite me. I want to thank you both so much, Laurie and Joseph, for your time and your wisdom and just what you're growing. It's really, really beautiful to see. Thank you so much for sharing with us so openly, so generously. What's the best way to stay in touch with you? Are you Instagram folks? Are y'all Twitter? Are y'all offline? Like, don't contact me. Check my website. Come and see us in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I do feel I am constantly trying to find pathways away from social media, for sure. But I'd say that Instagram may be the best. The Garden's Instagram is Abolition is a Garden, which you can pop into the chat as well, where you can keep up with the different events that we're having. But again, the online presence is simply a way of communication, because, as you mentioned, the work happens here in Bed-Stuy, in Brooklyn. So please come through. And enjoy this space with us. We do have some virtual offerings every now and again, ways for people to stay connected, to increase access to some of the things that we do. But yeah, I'd say that showing up in person is great. But if you would like to send a DM to say hey, that as well, don't engage with me on Twitter. That is a whole other world.
Thank you so much. And Laurie, thank you so much for putting that in the chat as well, ways of keeping in touch with you. I want to thank you guys all so much for joining us with this conversation today. Thank you so much for your presence and your energy with us. And thank you so much to the MAIA team as well for making sure everything's ticking over all right in the background. We've got some other events coming up in the MAIA season. Please check us out. And until then, have a wonderful afternoon, a wonderful evening, a wonderful morning, wherever y'all are. Take care and speak soon. All the best.